The story begins on a cold morning in Seattle, when the rain hadn't stopped after last night's storm. A grey light floated above the glass buildings, spilling down onto the wet street in front of the King County Courthouse. The wind carried the scent of damp wood and mist, making everything feel a little colder. Or maybe it was people's hearts that had turned cold. Inside courtroom number 3, the air was thick with the smell of paper and time. 2 people sat across from each other at a dark wooden table. In front of them was a stack of documents, the top one being a typed divorce decree, waiting only for 2 final signatures. Ethan Lewis adjusted his collar, fingers intertwined, knuckles white. He had promised to stay calm, rational, and mature when facing this moment. But now, with the pen right before him, his throat went dry. Across the table sat Grace Miller, the woman who had once been his everything. Her hair was neatly tied back, her face thinner than before, and her eyes no longer looked at him. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, the rain began again, soft but relentless, as if Seattle had never known real sunlight. Ethan's lawyer spoke quietly. "Mr. Lewis, please sign here." He nodded but didn't pick up the pen. For a brief moment, he looked at her. She didn't look back. Grace lowered her gaze, her hand trembling slightly as she held the pen. She wrote her name in that familiar slanted handwriting, then paused, breathed, and signed the final word. The pen touching paper cut through the silence like a blade. Ethan saw her hands tremble. He knew she was trying to hide her emotions as always when they argued. She would choose silence over shouting. He used to think that was her weakness. Now he understood it was the last way a person holds onto their dignity when everything else is falling apart. Grace gently pushed the file toward him when she put the pen down. The rustle of paper against wood sounded dry and final, like a door closing forever. Ethan picked up the pen. His hand felt heavy, fingers cold. He signed his name quickly, decisively, as if doing it fast would make the pain pass faster. Just a few strokes of ink, and it was over. A marriage once full of dreams was now reduced to a single sheet with 2 names. The lawyer gathered the documents, his voice steady. "The paperwork will be finalized within 30 days. Thank you both." No one said another word. Grace stood first, straightened her coat, and picked up her bag. Ethan thought about saying something, a thank you, maybe an apology, but the words stuck in his throat. She walked to the door, paused for just a beat, and said, softly, almost like a breath, "I hope you find what you're looking for." The door closed behind her, leaving emptiness and the sound of rain, falling harder now. Ethan sat there for a long time. Across from him, her chair was still warm, a faint imprint of her hand visible on the table. The lawyer said something, but he didn't hear. All he heard was the rain and the frantic beat of his heart. By the time Ethan left the courthouse, the sky had darkened. The mist clung to his face, slipping under his collar, cold and sharp. He strolled down the wet stone steps, gripping his umbrella but not opening it. The rain struck his face, as if trying to wash something away, or punish him for something he couldn't name. His car was parked a few blocks away. Sitting in the driver's seat, he realized he still held the file with her signature. He opened it, staring at the quiet line, Grace Miller Lewis. Beneath it, his own name. 2 names that once stood side by side, now separated by a blank space, a space that could never be filled. His phone vibrated. "Michael Paulson. Bro, it's done? You're free now, huh? Congrats, man. Come to the penthouse tonight, and we'll open some champagne. New chapter, new life." Ethan looked out the window. The rain traced down the glass, reflecting the streetlights like faint streaks of blood. He whispered, "Yeah, it's done." Michael laughed. "Good, forget it all. Leave the past behind." Ethan hung up. He started the engine, but didn't drive. He just sat there, listening to the wipers beat against the windshield, steady, indifferent, like a lullaby from a sad city. Somewhere inside his head, a small voice murmured, "You just lost the most precious thing in your life without realizing it." But Ethan pushed it away. He needed to believe he was right, that the marriage had been a burden, that he had chosen the future. He drove off through the familiar streets, the city lights reflected in the puddles like broken glass. In the rearview mirror, the courthouse grew smaller, like a memory fading away. But the emptiness stayed, sitting quietly in the back seat, following him home. That evening, the penthouse of Michael Paulson gleamed with light. Luxury, expensive wine, soft jazz. The glass doors opened to a balcony overlooking a city veiled in mist. Ethan stood there, holding a glass of wine he didn't drink. Michael came over and clapped his shoulder. "So that's it. Now you can focus on the project. No more distractions." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, distractions." From above, the city lights looked like 1,000 glowing wounds. He had thought this was what he wanted: freedom, work, money, a wide-open future. But when Michael said the word freedom, all Ethan could hear was the rain tapping against the glass. After a few polite conversations, he left the party early. The elevator doors closed, reflecting his face cold, distant, unfamiliar. Outside, Seattle was still raining. He drove aimlessly through the streets where they used to walk hand in hand, past the cafe she loved, past the theater where they had their first date. Every place breathed of the past, and every breath made it harder to breathe. He stopped by the Aurora Bridge. The river below was dark, thick, mirroring the scattered city lights. A cold wind swept through, carrying the smell of rust and rain. He wondered, if she came back today, would he still sign? A simple question, with no answer. Across the city, in a small apartment on Capitol Hill, Grace sat by the window, watching the rain. In front of her was a cup of cold tea and the divorce decree lying on the table. She read the words, "Lewis versus Lewis," one more time, then folded the paper. Her hand brushed against her stomach. A sudden, strange ache. Grace sighed. Outside, the rain blended with the distant sound of a streetcar passing. She closed her eyes, telling herself it was over. But when she opened them, her pillow was wet with tears. Somewhere in this city, two people had just signed the same paper, at the exact moment, under the same rain, yet standing on opposite ends of the world. That night, Ethan lay in bed in his wide, empty apartment, city lights flickering across the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. The rain tapped endlessly on the window. He reached for his phone and looked at an old photo. Grace, in a white dress, smiling brightly by the lake. He turned off the screen, set the phone face down, but her image lingered in his mind. "You're free now, aren't you?" he asked himself, but nothing felt like freedom. Only emptiness. A void that no city, money, or new project could ever fill. Outside, the rain fell all night, and no one knew that somewhere else, in a quiet room, Grace lay on her side, hand resting on her belly. A tiny, fragile heartbeat had just begun. She didn't know. He didn't know. But from that very moment, their destinies had already shifted toward a future where the life not yet born would become the thread pulling them back together, no matter how long the darkness in between. Mẹ đẻ Theo English đã nói. Part 2. Hollow Rooms. Capitol Hill, Seattle. A misty morning. Cold air slipped through the old window frame, carrying the scent of damp wood and a faint saltiness from the distant lake. Grace Lewis stood in the middle of her newly rented apartment, with only a small suitcase and a few cardboard boxes. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet, each sound a quiet reminder that she was truly alone from now on. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, its paint peeling, the hallway smelling of fresh paint mixed with cheap coffee. The window faced a sloping street, where fog drifted across the rooftops every morning. Grace stood still for a long time, her hand gripping the key. She didn't want to set anything down. She didn't want to open the suitcase. Sometimes, when one chapter of life ends, we don't know how to begin the next. And she, someone who once believed in simple joys and happiness born from small things, could now feel emptiness. She turned on the light. A weak yellow glow spread across the bare white walls, revealing a few thin cracks. No TV, no music, no footsteps but her own. The apartment was barely 20 square meters, yet it felt like a universe without sound. Grace sank to the floor and leaned against the wall. She closed her eyes, trying not to think about the morning before the sound of the pen signing, the door closing, Ethan's cold expression. It had all happened too fast for her even to catch her breath. After a while, she opened her eyes and looked through the fogged-up window. On the street below, people hurried to work. Buses glided through puddles, and the red traffic lights flickered in her tired eyes. Her heart felt heavy, as if someone had taken a piece of it and forgotten to return it. "It's okay, Grace. You'll be fine," she whispered. But even her voice sounded distant, like she was trying to comfort someone else, not herself. That first day, she cleaned, wiped the floors, and arranged every small item as if tidying her life might quiet her mind. But the more she arranged, the more she realized how little she had. She hadn't dared to measure a few clothes, open a few books, or open a few photo frames. Nightlight and all, laughter from the couple next door drifted through the thin wall, the sound of them arguing over the TV remote, the hiss of oil in a pan. Ordinary sounds, yet they made her feel painfully out of place. Grace switched on the small lamp by the bed and tried to read, but her eyes kept stopping on the same line. Sometimes the silence is the loudest sound. She closed the book. The room sank again into the sound of wind and rain outside the window. Days passed. Grace went back to work. She took a part-time job at a small interior design company. The work was simple, repetitive. Every morning, she caught the bus downtown, watching the city roll by through the window, then came home to her empty apartment at dusk. No one waited for her. No one asked, "How was your day?" But at least the routine kept her from thinking about Ethan, about the look in his eyes as he signed his name. Not hateful, not loving, just empty. One night, she came home late. Streetlights shimmered across the damp floorboards, casting uneven patterns of gold. She opened the door and flicked the switch. The light flickered before steadying. On the table, her cup of tea from the morning still sat untouched, the steam long gone. She sat down, staring into the space in front of her, and let out a faint, tired laugh, a sound no one heard. A spring rain began to fall outside, steady and soft, like the city's long sigh. She turned off the light, lay down, and pulled the blanket to her chest. Sometimes she dreamed of Ethan. In her dreams, he still said her name in that deep, gentle voice, still touched her hand the way he used to. She'd wake in the middle of the night, heart aching as if someone had pressed a blade into her memories. The third night, the fourth, the fifth, the room stayed the same. But inside her, something was changing. More fatigue, dizziness, and a dull ache in her lower belly each morning. Grace thought it was stress or lack of sleep. She bought packets of instant coffee, bitter and pungent, trying to stay alert. But her body wouldn't listen. She started skipping meals, losing weight, and often feeling nauseous. One morning, she looked at herself in the mirror in Seattle's dim grey light. A pale face, dark circles. Her hand brushed over her stomach. Something felt different. Not quite pain, but something else. A strange intuition stopped her cold. No, it can't be, she told herself. But as she sat down on the edge of the bed, her breathing quickened, palms sweating. She pushed the thought away. She didn't dare believe it, didn't dare think further. She went out, blended into the morning crowd, and worked as usual. But all day, her mind drifted elsewhere. The sound of keyboards, printers, co-workers calling her name all blurred into a distant hum. By evening, as she stood at the bus stop, everything began to spin. The yellow light from the shelter swayed, and the world tilted. She fell. The only sound she heard before darkness swallowed her was someone shouting, "Call 911." When she opened her eyes, a white ceiling loomed above. The smell of antiseptic, the steady beeping of a monitor. Grace blinked, trying to understand where she was. A gentle voice spoke beside her. "You're awake. Don't try to sit up." A woman in a white coat stepped closer, smiling softly. "I'm Dr. Naomi Okoye." Grace nodded weakly. I just fainted. I'm fine." Okoye smiled kindly. "We ran some tests. There's something you should know." She turned the ultrasound screen toward Grace. A hazy gray image appeared, with two tiny flickers pulsing rhythmically inside it. Grace's eyes widened, uncomprehending. "That's a heartbeat," the doctor said gently. "You're pregnant, Grace. And it's twins." For a few seconds, Grace couldn't breathe. The room fell silent. The steady beeping of the machine echoed like someone knocking softly on her heart. "No, that's not possible. You can double-check if you'd like, the doctor said. But the results are accurate. Grace covered her mouth as tears spilled freely. She couldn't tell if it was fear or joy. She laughed through her tears, voice trembling. 2. There are 2 of them. The doctor nodded, her eyes kind. They're both healthy, but you'll need rest and proper meals. Twin pregnancies can be tough. Grace gripped the blanket, emotion surging through her like a wave. She stared at the screen, 2 small, beating hearts. Fragile, brave. Something inside her lit up. Dr. Okoye asked softly, "Would you like us to contact the father?" Grace shook her head. "No need. I'll be okay." Okoye nodded, saying nothing more. Later, alone in the hospital room, Grace looked out the window. The Seattle sky was still gray, but a sliver of light broke through the clouds. She placed her hand gently on her stomach, where 2 tiny lives were beginning to grow. "I'm here," she whispered. "I promise I won't let anyone hurt you." A single tear slipped onto her pillow. And in that vast, lonely city, she suddenly wasn't completely alone anymore. That evening, when Nurse Pilar Torres brought in her dinner, Grace smiled for the first time in weeks. "You're having a baby?" Pilar asked, her eyes warm. "Yes," Grace said softly. 2. Pilar laughed. "Then you're not alone anymore." Grace said nothing, her slight smile trembling. She knew her life was about to change completely. But this time, not because of anyone else. It was because of 2 tiny heartbeats inside her, beating in rhythm with the rain outside. Mẹ đẻ Theo English đã nói. Part 3. 2 heartbeats. Seattle was wrapped in cold mist the first morning after leaving the hospital. The air carried the damp scent of last night's rain and the fading sweetness of cherry blossoms. Grace wrapped a thin scarf around her neck and stood before the mirror in her small apartment, her hand brushing lightly over her still flat stomach. No one could see it, but inside her, 2 tiny heartbeats were pulsing quiet, steady, proud. She still couldn't fully believe it. Everything felt like a dream or perhaps a painful awakening. She thought her life had ended a week ago when she exited that courthouse. Now, she was beginning a new one, a life that no longer belonged only to her. Grace touched the window and looked down at the street below. People hurried through the drizzle, clutching coffee cups and briefcases. No one knew she was standing here, a divorced woman carrying 2 fragile lives inside her, the children of a man who had already walked away. She thought of Ethan. He was probably at the office, fingers flying across a keyboard, mind occupied with numbers, deals, and parties he liked to call the future. Did he ever think of her? Of this empty apartment? Of the trembling hands that now rested over her heart? The answer she already knew was no. Ethan never looked back. He had walked toward the light, leaving her behind in the dark. But in that darkness, 2 small sparks had begun to grow. She pulled out a small grey notebook and wrote on the first page, "Day 1, 2 heartbeats." Then added another line, "I don't know how to do this, but I promise to protect you." The pen stopped, her eyes blurred. Grace felt a strange kind of peace for the first time in months. She was still scared, still anxious, still alone, but now she had a reason to keep going. In the days that followed, she learned to slow down. In the mornings, she drank milk instead of coffee. She forced herself to eat at lunch, even when everything tasted bitter. At night, she played soft music, placed a hand on her belly, and listened to the quiet feeling of life growing inside her. But fear lingered beneath the calm. She hadn't told anyone. No friends, no family, no co-workers. Everyone assumed she was recovering from the divorce. No one knew the truth. Each time she passed the mirror, she whispered to herself, "I'm fine. I can do this." But when the night came and silence filled the room, she could hear her own heartbeat blending with 2 others. A soft reminder. "You're not alone, Mom." At 8 weeks, she returned to the hospital. Dr. Okoye greeted her with a warm smile. "You look better. The twins are doing well, strong heartbeats." Grace smiled faintly and nodded. "Thank you, Doctor. Do you have anyone coming with you yet?" Okoye asked gently, already knowing the answer. "No, I'll manage." "You'll need help, Grace. Twin pregnancies can be difficult." "I know, but I'll try." Okoye nodded, her eyes holding something between compassion and admiration. After the checkup, she printed 2 ultrasound photos and handed them to Grace. 2 hearts, 2 miracles. Grace held the photos. 2 tiny shapes glowing on white paper, 2 lives she had never imagined carrying. She tucked them safely in her coat pocket on her way home, like a charm against the world. The apartment was dark and silent when she returned. Grace turned on the light and opened the fridge with milk, bread, and apples. She mentally counted rent, electricity, and medical bills. Her balance wasn't much, but she smiled not because she had enough, but because, for once, she wanted to try. That night, as the wind slipped through the window cracks, she wrapped herself in a blanket, opened her grey notebook, and wrote, Day 27. I'm okay. You're okay. We'll make it. Ethan sat in his glass-walled office on the 30th floor somewhere else, staring at the mist-covered city below. He had just closed a significant deal. Applause filled the room. Michael Paulson clapped him on the back, grinning. This is the start of a new era. Ethan smiled too, but the smile never reached his eyes. Inside, there was still a hollow space he couldn't name, and each night, as he tried to sleep, he heard a voice in the rain whispering, I hope you find what you're looking for. By the 3rd month of pregnancy, Seattle had sunk into its long, grey rains. Grace's apartment grew damper, colder. Some days, she felt like the whole city was crying with her. In the mornings, she sat by the window with a cup of warm milk, watching strangers hurry by. Her belly had started to show slightly. Only she could see it. Only she could know. She'd stopped working at the office too tired, too dizzy, and followed Dr. Okoya's advice to rest. Fortunately, she'd found a remote data entry job. It didn't pay much, but it was enough. She set up a small desk by the window, surrounded by papers and a few potted plants from the market. The plants wilted quickly in the damp air, but she kept caring for them, as if to remind herself that everything could survive, if loved long enough. Sometimes, Pilar, the young nurse from the hospital, would visit. She brought bread, juice, and gentle conversation. Do you have any family in Seattle? She asked. No, Grace smiled. Just these 2 little ones. You're powerful. I don't think I could handle what you're doing. People only find strength when they have no choice, Grace said softly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the rain. If you ever need someone to go with you to your appointments, Pilar said, call me. I'm free on Saturdays. Grace nodded, her eyes glistening. Sometimes, a small kindness is all it takes to make someone cry. That night, lying in bed, she felt the first flutter inside her. A faint ripple under her skin, then stillness. She smiled through tears. I felt you. Was that you? She whispered into the dark. No one answered, but deep inside her, 2 heartbeats pulsed in rhythm with her own. 3 steady notes in the long symphony of fate. Days passed, and her body weakened. She ate less and slept poorly. She looked in the mirror each morning, paler, thinner, darker around the eyes. She hid her fear by cleaning, writing, whispering to her unborn children. It's raining again today. You know, Seattle never really dries. Maybe it understands people's hearts. She laughed lightly, her voice trembling. On her way to a checkup one afternoon, she waited under an awning as the rain came down hard, heavy drops striking the pavement like bullets. She pulled her coat tight and bowed her head, and then she saw him, Ethan, standing across the street beside Michael, both of them laughing, holding steaming cups of coffee, looking relaxed, content, untouched by any storm. Grace froze. The rain hit her face, cold and sharp, but she didn't move. Her stomach tightened, a mother's instinct to protect. She didn't know what to do, whether to call out to him. Her heart pounded, fingers gripping her bass strap. A part of her wanted to run across, to scream, Ethan, do you know, I'm carrying your children. But she stopped. He was smiling, a calm, easy smile. She turned away, walking quickly into the crowd, hiding her tears in the rain. No one noticed. No one knew. Only the wind carried the scent of coffee and the ache in her heart. Back home, Grace opened the drawer and took out their old wedding photo that night. She stared at the 2 faces smiling in the summer light. Now, all that warmth had turned to winter. She flipped the photo face down and whispered, You don't need to know. I'll raise them on my own. She broke down then, but this time, her tears weren't only from loss. They were from strength, the quiet, unyielding strength of a mother. Outside, the rain kept falling. On the table lay the ultrasound photo, 2 glowing dots, still growing, still brave. Grace placed her hand over her belly and whispered, 2 heartbeats, 2 miracles. As long as I'm breathing, I'll keep you safe. Somewhere in the city, Ethan sat in his high-rise apartment, listening to the rain tapping against the glass. Not knowing why, his chest suddenly felt heavy, as if someone had whispered his name in the dark. He stared into his glass of wine, his reflection pale, unfamiliar, hollow. A distant rumble of thunder lit up the sky, and he realized there was no one left to share the silence with. Spring passed in mist and rain. Seattle drifted into May, when azaleas bloomed red along the slopes of Capitol Hill. Grace's apartment looked the same, small, damp, but filled with a strange warmth. Her belly had rounded. It could no longer be hidden, though she still wore loose shirts, walked softly, spoke little. Every step was measured. Every night was a quiet conversation between her and the 2 little lives inside her. "We're okay, aren't we?" she would whisper. "I know you can hear me." There was never an answer, only a gentle movement under her skin, as if in reply. When Seattle's rare sunlight slipped through the morning curtains, she made warm milk, set the cup on the table, and played soft piano music. The silence in the room gained rhythm, gained breath. She started talking more, not to people, but to space itself, as if afraid that silence might swallow her whole. "Mom's a little tired today," she would murmur, "but I'll eat properly. Doctor Okoya will scold me if I don't." She chuckled, her voice warm but trembling. Sometimes, when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself, pale face, tired eyes, messy hair. Yet within that reflection glimmered something fragile and luminous, the light of life growing inside her. But not every day was kind. There were long, sleepless nights, aching back, cramps, waves of exhaustion. Some nights she lay on the floor, tears rolling down for no apparent reason. She no longer felt angry at Ethan, but the sadness clung to her like fog, never gone, just thinner. When she went out to the market, to the street, memories would find her. A couple arguing on a corner, a man holding an umbrella over his wife, the faint scent of cologne, his cologne, and even on the brightest days, she still saw ghosts. Not the kind that haunt in darkness, but fragments of her old life are appearing everywhere. In a distant laugh, a familiar melody, sunlight hit the table just right. One afternoon, after leaving the hospital, she stopped by a cafe on Pine Street. She and Ethan used to come here. He had always liked the seat by the window facing the street. She stood outside for a moment, hesitating. Then, like some cruel twist of fate, she saw him, Ethan, sitting in the same seat, a laptop open, espresso in hand, his eyes weary but focused. Across from him sat a woman, perhaps a colleague. They spoke, smiled, and laughed softly. Grace froze. Everything around her slowed: the rain, the cars, the noise. She could only see him, as if the world had narrowed to that single image. She turned and walked away quickly, arms wrapped around her belly as though shielding it. No one noticed a woman with wet eyes, lost in the crowd. Back home, she stood by the door, chest heaving, tears mixing with the rain on her face. She sat down, wiped her cheeks, and laughed bitterly. "See, Grace? He's fine. He doesn't need you." She opened her grey notebook and wrote, "Day 85. I saw your father today. He looked well. He smiled. And that makes me feel at peace, I think." But when she finished the last word, tears blurred the ink. That night, she dreamed of him, a strange dream. He stood in a hospital corridor, hand reaching toward her, eyes sad. She tried to move closer, but her legs wouldn't move. The hallway was filled with fog. She called out, but he didn't hear. When she woke, her pillow was damp. Seattle was still raining. She stepped out onto the balcony, breathing deeply under the grey sky. Maybe she would have to learn to live with these ghosts, because they don't vanish, they only fade. By the 6th month, Grace's belly was unmistakable. Her movements are slower, and her mind is more precise than ever. In the early mornings, she opened the window to let the wind sweep through the curtains. Seattle had its own kind of dawn, misty, half asleep, filled with the faint sounds of distant traffic and lost birds. She stood by the window, hand resting on her belly, feeling the two small souls shifting within. She thought about names. 2 boys. She'd learned that at her last checkup, when Dr. Okoye had smiled and said, 2 little gentlemen, strong and stubborn, just like their mother. Grace had laughed through her tears. Since that day, she'd called them my boys. She read to them daily not fairy tales, but passages about hope. She believed that even unborn, they could feel her voice, breath, and heartbeat. One day, she whispered, we'll walk these rainy streets together, and I'll tell you about this city where it never stops raining, but love still manages to grow. Sometimes Pilar dropped by, bringing soup, fresh bread, and warmth. You look better, Pilar said once. There's light in your eyes now. Grace smiled softly. Maybe it's because I'm not afraid anymore. But on long, damp days, when the city seemed drowned in mist, loneliness crept back. She missed Ethan's hand on her back, his voice calling her name in the dark, the scent of him coffee and cedarwood. One evening, she received an email from her old company, a congratulatory note on a significant project Ethan had just completed. She stared at the line. Ethan Lewis, CEO of Lewis and Paulson Architects. Her heart clenched, not from jealousy, but from memory. She shut the laptop and walked to the window. Across the street, her neighbors were hanging string lights, laughing softly. She leaned her head against the wall and whispered, he used to look at me like that. The rain fell lightly. The glow from the window lights traced her face painful, beautiful, strong. She pinned the ultrasound photo to the wall above her desk. Beneath it, she taped a small note. Ben and Blake, the best thing that ever happened to me. That night, her room glowed with gentle gold. Grace sat on her bed and read from her notebook. Day 120. I feel you both moving more now. Maybe Ben, maybe Blake, I don't know. But I can feel you living. I won't give up, even if I have to walk this road alone. She closed the notebook, rested her hand on her belly, and closed her eyes. Outside, the rain fell softly, another heartbeat joining the 3 within that tiny room. Somewhere across the city, Ethan stood alone in his office, his reflection caught in the glass adrift among neon lights. He had just signed another deal, another victory. Michael laughed and congratulated him, and when Michael left, the room turned hollow. Ethan looked out at the rain and remembered a morning long ago. Grace brought him coffee, smiling as she said, "You're great at working, Ethan. But remember to live sometimes." He laughed now, a dry, empty sound. He had everything he'd ever wanted, except the only thing that had ever mattered. Outside, Seattle blurred in fog, and in a small apartment on Capitol Hill, 3 heartbeats still pulsed. Beneath the dim light of a bedside lamp, the ghosts in daylight lingered. But they no longer frightened her, because now Grace had learned how to live with them, to live with her memories, and with the love that once was. July in Seattle was never truly summer. The rain still came without warning, cold, relentless, and the rare sunny days disappeared as quickly as lightning. Grace was nearly 7 months pregnant. Her belly had grown full, her skin pale, her eyes hollow. Every morning in the mirror, she saw a different woman staring back, no longer the bride in white or wife sitting in a courthouse. She was someone else now, someone who had walked through darkness and was still fighting breath by breath to keep life alive inside her. Dr. Okoye had warned her, "Twins are never easy. Your body is working twice as hard. Don't push yourself too far." Grace had nodded, but she had no choice. Her remote data entry job barely covered rent, food, and vitamins. She rose early, worked until noon, rested briefly, then worked again until evening. At night, she often woke from light cramps or the sound of wind sneaking through the window, half expecting to hear someone whisper her name. Pilar still came by every weekend, helping with chores, cooking soup, and bringing stories from the hospital. "Grace, you need more rest. You look pale as a ghost." "I'm fine, just tired." "Tired? You are a ghost." Grace laughed weakly. "Seattle's full of ghosts, Pilar. I'm just fitting in." They both laughed, but Pilar's eyes betrayed worry. Before leaving, she always left a bag of food, some vitamins, and a small note. "Don't forget you have someone to call if you need." That night, Grace stared at that note long before sticking it on her fridge. Someone to call. A simple phrase that felt like a miracle. Days blurred into one another. She no longer counted by calendar dates, only by the number of times the babies kicked. Every movement made her smile even through the pain. "Good morning, Ben." Blake. The names escaped her lips like prayer, but her body had begun to betray her. The dizziness came more often. She couldn't sleep, couldn't keep food down. Even walking across the room sent her heart racing. One morning, while typing, her vision went black. She gripped the table, gasping, chest tightening as though invisible hands were squeezing her lungs. Her hand went instinctively to her belly. "It's okay. I'm okay," she whispered. But her body didn't listen. The world tilted. When she came to, she was on the floor, her back slick with sweat. The clock showed nearly noon. Grey light filtered weakly through the window. She crawled toward the bed, trying to stand. A sharp pain shot through her lower back. For the first time, she was terrified. Not for herself, but for the two small lives depending on her heartbeat. She reached for her phone to call Pilar, but her hands trembled. It slipped and clattered to the floor, the screen glowing faintly as it rolled away. She staggered after it, everything spinning. A voice in her head whispered, "Don't faint, don't give up." She crawled to the door, cracked it open, praying someone might hear. From the hall came only muffled music from a neighbor's apartment. She knocked weakly, whispering, "Help, please." Her voice was so faint that she could barely hear it. She collapsed, one hand clutching her belly, and felt a sudden, violent movement inside. Then warmth, blood, a spreading red stain on the wooden floor. Her world dimmed, her heartbeat faltered, and in that fading moment, she thought of Ethan, not with anger, but with longing. If only you knew. Then the darkness swallowed her whole. The first sound she heard was the steady beep of a monitor. A long, drawn-out tone, then silence, then another. The smell of antiseptic, footsteps pounding against Thiele. She couldn't open her eyes. Someone shouted near her ear. Blood pressure dropping. Start transfusion. Another voice urgent but controlled. She's losing too much blood. Both fetuses are in distress. Prepare for emergency surgery. It was Dr. Okoye. Grace wanted to speak, but her throat was dry, her lips heavy. Amid the chaos, she recognized Pilar's trembling voice. "Doctor, we're out of AB negative blood in storage. I called the reserve center, and they said 2 hours is minimum." "2 hours is too long," Okoye snapped. "Torres, pull her old file, see if there's any family match." Footsteps faded down the hall. The room buzzed with movement, with panic disguised as precision. The surgical lights reflected in Okoye's calm but fierce eyes. "Stay with me, Grace. Hear me? Breathe. Deep breath. For your boys. Do you understand?" Grace heard, but couldn't answer. The world blurred. Her own heartbeat sounded far away. In another room, Pilar flipped through papers with shaking hands. The only listed relative is Ethan Lewis, who is an ex-husband. She froze. On the monitor, the mother's and baby's heart rates wavered too fast, then too slow. "No more time," she whispered. She grabbed the phone and dialed the number in the file. Once. Twice. No answer. She called again. Still nothing. Downtown, Ethan was having dinner with Michael. Golden lights, wine glasses, polite laughter, the easy noise of successful men. His phone buzzed unknown number. He glanced at it, frowned, and ignored it. Pilar bit her lip and dialed a third time. The ringing seemed endless. Ethan sighed, finally picking up. "Hello? Who is this? Mr. Ethan Lewis?" "Yes. Speaking. This is Nurse Pilar Torres from City General Hospital. Grace Miller Lewis is in critical condition. She's lost significant blood, and we're out of AB negative supply. You're the only compatible donor listed." Silence. The wine glass froze halfway to his lips. What did you say?" "If we don't get blood within the next 30 minutes, both she and the babies won't make it." The words hit him like a lightning strike. Michael frowned. "Ethan? What's wrong?" Ethan shot to his feet, the chair clattering behind him. "Grace. She's..." He couldn't finish. He just ran. Out of the restaurant, into the storm. On the phone, Pilar could hear his ragged breathing. The rush of wind he was running. "Please hurry. Emergency entrance. City General." "I'm on my way," he shouted, his voice breaking as thunder cracked overhead. He dove into his car, engine roaring to life. Rain hammered the windshield as he tore through the streets. Lightning flared across the skyline. Red lights blurred through sheets of water. His pulse thundered in his ears. Images flickered in his mind. Her signing the divorce papers, the door closing, her laughter under the summer Sunday. "Grace, you were pregnant?" Tears mixed with the rain. He couldn't tell which was which. All he knew was this: if he didn't reach her, she would die, and he would never forgive himself. The car raced over Aurora Bridge, tires sliding on wet asphalt, headlights cutting through fog like knives. He gripped the wheel tight, whispering, "Please, don't die. Not again." Thunder rolled. Each second stretched like a lifetime. When the hospital lights appeared through the storm, he slammed the accelerator. The emergency gates opened just as the rain came down in torrents. Pilar was waiting, soaked to the bone. When she saw him, she exhaled in relief, voice trembling. "You made it. Thank God." Ethan said nothing. He followed her through the white corridors echoing with chaos machines beeping, wheels clattering, voices calling orders. At the end of the hall, Dr. Okoye turned, met his eyes, and nodded toward the transfusion room. "We need your blood. Now." He didn't hesitate. He stripped off his coat, rolled his sleeve, and offered his arm. "Take as much as you need. Just save her." The crimson flow began, running through clear tubing under fluorescent light. Outside, the storm raged on, and Seattle held its breath, as if the whole city knew that, at that moment, something immense was about to change. The emergency room doors burst open. Rain kept hammering against the hallway windows, loud, urgent, like the city's heartbeat. Ethan stumbled in, breathless. Harsh white light flooded the room, and the sharp smell of disinfectant stung his nose. A nurse hurried over, inserting a needle into his arm. His blood, dark, warm, alive, began to flow through a clear plastic tube. On the bag, AB was printed in bold black ink, one of the rarest blood types, and now the fragile thread keeping Grace alive. Dr. Naomi Okoye appeared, calm and steady, the kind of composure forged from years on the edge between life and death. "Mr. Lewis," she said briefly, "we're transfusing your blood directly into her. She's lost over half her volume. We have no reserves left. You're her only chance." Ethan nodded, his lips trembling. Is she going to make it?" "I don't know yet," Okoye replied, her voice level, firm. "She's in emergency surgery. The babies have been delivered, but they're both in critical condition." He froze. "Babies? Twins? You didn't know?" He couldn't speak. The words sliced through him like glass. Images came flooding back the courthouse morning, her trembling hands, the sound of her pen on paper. She had been pregnant, even as he'd walked away. She never told me. "And you never asked," Dr. Okoye said quietly, her tone cutting but not cruel. "She came here alone. No family, no friends. If someone hadn't found her in time, she and both babies would be gone by now." The tube shuddered softly with each beat of his heart. Ethan stared at the rising bag of crimson, a lump tightening in his throat. "She's still alive?" "For now, but I can't promise how long it will last." The words hung in the sterile air like a sentence waiting to fall. Every second felt like he could hear his own blood moving into her veins, not as love, but as penance. Outside, the storm raged. Streetlights flickered. It felt as though the entire city was holding its breath. In the operating room, Grace lay motionless, skin pale, lips cracked, monitors beeping frantically. "Increase flow rate," Okoye ordered. "Prepare adrenaline." A nurse's voice broke the rhythm. "Her pulse is fading, doctor. We're losing her." "No," Okoye said sharply. "She still has 2 children. She won't give up. Keep compressions going." The monitor flatlined a single, cold, unbroken tone. Ethan felt his chest seize as if someone had punched through his ribs. He gripped the chair, breath shallow. And then, beep, weak, stuttering. But there, then another, and another. Steady. Okoye exhaled. She's back. His blood had reached her. Pilar glanced at the second filling bag and whispered, almost like a prayer, "Thank God." In the neonatal ward, two tiny bodies lay side by side in incubators. They were so small that an adult's hand could nearly cover their chests. Their skin was thin and translucent, but beneath it were two faint, stubborn, steady heartbeats. One nurse murmured, 7 months, twins, mother nearly gone. I don't know if they'll make it. Don't say that, another said softly. They have a father now. A father? Where is he? Out there giving blood for their mother. Both nurses fell silent, watching the fragile lives beneath the glass. One baby twitched, a tiny finger curling as if reaching for someone unseen. In the donor room, the transfusion ended. Pilar wrapped his arm carefully. We'll keep monitoring her. You should rest, Mr. Lewis. He shook his head. I'm not leaving. She'll be in recovery. No one can go in. I know. I'll wait. He sat down on the cold metal chair, the hum of machines filling the still air. He looked at the white bandage on his arm, at the red stain spreading through the gauze. He remembered another red once ink on a divorce paper, cold and final. This red was different, warm, alive. All his ambitions, his deals, his wealth, none of it meant anything now. He wanted only one thing, to hear that she was breathing. Now he understood freedom had never been about walking away. True freedom was the courage to hold on to what you feared losing most, and to love it properly. He leaned his head back against the wall. His blood was inside her now, flowing, binding, saving. The invisible thread between them pulled taut again, not by fate, but by life itself. 3 hours later, the surgical lights dimmed. Dr. Okoye removed her mask and exhaled. She's stable. She made it. A nurse smiled through tears. The twins are breathing on their own now, doctor. Good. Bring in the father, the donor. I need to speak to him. Pilar hurried down the hall. When she saw Ethan still sitting there, she touched his shoulder. Mr. Lewis, she's safe. You saved her. He looked up, eyes wet. No words, just a nod. She led him to Dr. Okoye's office. The doctor stood by the window, rain still whispering against the glass, her reflection faint in the grey light. Mr. Lewis, she began, thank you for coming in time. She lost a massive amount of blood, but she's past the danger now. The twins are in NICU. Twins. His voice cracked. 2 boys. Yes. Both strong. They're yours, no question. He turned away, hiding his tears. Oh God. Okoye's voice softened. She's been through everything alone. No visitors. No one. I don't know why you didn't know, but I saw regret in your eyes when you walked in. Make it mean something, Mr. Lewis. Don't let her be alone again. He nodded, voice rough. I won't. Not ever again. When Ethan was finally allowed into recovery, Grace was still unconscious. Her face was pale, hair damp with sweat, lips parted slightly as if whispering his name in her sleep. He stood there for a long time, just watching. There were too many words, none of them enough. He sat beside her and took her hand, thin, cool, familiar. Grace. His voice broke. I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for not seeing you, for not asking. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll stay. If you let me, I'll wait. The monitor hummed softly, her heartbeat steady. He rested his forehead against her hand, a single tear landing on her skin. Outside, dawn began to break. After the storm, the first light stretched across the sky, soft pink over the wet city. In the neonatal ward, the twins stirred. One blinked open an eye, reaching upward with a tiny hand. The nurse smiled, looking for someone, little one. Next door, their father sat in silence, still holding their mother's hand. Inside her veins, his blood flowed with hers, 2 lives once broken, now mended by something sacred and straightforward, life itself. When morning came, Pilar brought him a cup of hot coffee. You shouldn't keep blaming yourself, she said gently. What matters is you came back in time. I don't know if I can ever make it right. You can, she said, smiling faintly. But it starts with staying. He nodded, staying. For the first time in months, he knew exactly what he needed to do. He looked again at the woman sleeping peacefully, the one who had once loved him completely, and had endured everything when he walked away. He squeezed her hand gently and whispered, We still have a chance, Grace. I won't lose you again. The monitor answered with a steady beep, 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 a fragile, rhythmic melody of life. Outside, Seattle gleamed, washed clean by the storm. Rain-soaked streets mirrored the pale pink sky. A new chapter was beginning quietly, tenderly, where 3 hearts had crossed the line between death and life, to start again, bound by blood, debt, and love unspoken. That morning in Seattle felt different. No rain, only soft streaks of light reflected off wet streets, and a thin veil of mist draped gently over the city. Inside City General Hospital, the hallways still glowed under white light. The air was a mix of disinfectant, coffee, and people, an in-between scent of life and loss, the kind only hospitals carry. Ethan sat outside the recovery room, eyes red, fingers wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. He hadn't slept in hours. Pilar appeared quietly. She's stable, she said softly. Her blood pressure's holding. She's just weak. It'll take time before she wakes. Ethan nodded, voice rough. Thank you for calling me. No need to thank me. Pilar smiled gently. I just did what she deserved. Then she touched his shoulder. Would you like to see the babies? He looked up. His weary eyes flickered like a man glimpsing light after a long night. Can I? Pilar nodded and motioned for him to follow. They walked down the long corridor, white light glinting on the polished tiles. Each of his footsteps echoed, steady but unsure, like he was crossing into a world he'd never imagined himself part of. They stopped before a glass door labeled NICU, Neonatal Intensive Care Unit. Inside, the light was dimmer, hushed. The rhythmic beeping of machines filled the silence, the faint pulse of tiny lives. Rows of incubators glowed softly. Inside them, fragile bodies curled beneath wires and blinking lights. Pilar led him to the far corner. Here. Ben and Blake Lewis. Ethan froze. 2 babies, side by side, each in a separate incubator. They were impossibly small skin, thin as silk, lips pale pink, their entire hands no bigger than his thumb. On the monitor, twin heartbeats flickered. Beep, beep, beep. A broken melody, but alive. He pressed his palm to the glass, his hand trembling. No sound came, only tears sliding down his face. My sons, he whispered. My boys. Pilar spoke softly behind him. Grace chose to keep them, even after we warned her how dangerous it was. She said, I can't give them up. They're the only part of me left. Ethan clenched his fists, each word cut deeper than any blade. She carried everything alone, because of me. He watched the 2 tiny chests rising and falling. Dr. Okoya's words echoed in his mind. You didn't ask. She didn't tell. That silence had nearly killed them all. Pilar rested a hand on his shoulder. You know, in medicine, we can't explain things. Some mothers stay alive on nothing but love. Ethan nodded faintly, unable to speak. He just stood there, watching until the flicker of the monitors seemed to beat in time with his own heart. I'm sorry, he whispered. I wasn't there when you needed me. And for a moment, he swore one of the babies stirred. A tiny hand twitched, fingers curling as if reaching for him. He smiled through tears. That was enough. That was forgiveness, in its smallest form. Outside, the sky brightened. His coffee was cold, but his chest felt strangely warm. For the first time in months, he understood what it meant to be alive. Pilar guided him back to the waiting area. Grace might wake soon, she said. Ethan nodded, sitting by her bedside once more. Her face was pale but peaceful. Her hand rested lightly on the blanket, fingers trembling as he touched them. I'm here, Grace, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. Sunlight broke through the blinds, spilling across her face. Her eyelids fluttered. He felt his heart Zeise. Can you hear me? No answer, only the monitor's steady rhythm. But he believed she could. Because sometimes love didn't need words, it only required presence. Night fell slowly. Seattle slipped back into its old rhythm, wet streets glowing gold beneath the lamps, distant traffic murmuring, rain lingering in the air. Ethan never left her side. Even when Pilar urged him to rest, he only shook his head. Near midnight, Dr. Okoya entered. You're still here? I can't leave. She's improving. She might wake soon. Don't say much when she does. Just let her know you're here. He nodded. I don't want her to be afraid. She won't, Okoye said, her tone softening. She's stronger than you think. At the door, she turned. And the boys there responding well to treatment. Thank you, doctor. When she was gone, Ethan sat again beside Grace. He pulled 2 small photographs from his pocket ultrasound prints Pilar had given him and set them on the table beside her hand. These are our boys, Grace, he murmured. Ben and Blake. You carried them on your own. I don't know how to ask for forgiveness. The machines hummed softly. Her eyes stayed closed, but her lips moved, barely audible. Ben, just one word, fragile as breath, and it nearly broke him. She remembered. She'd heard him. He took her hand, voice shaking. Yes, Ben and Blake. They're safe now. You all are. In that moment, he no longer felt like the man who'd left. He was someone learning how to love again. Not through grand gestures, but through quiet persistence, through the act of holding on. Outside, rain began to fall in light, hesitant drops. The intercom echoed faintly through the halls, blending with the soft beeping of her heartbeat. Time slowed like the world was trying to hold this fragile peace. Just before dawn, Grace stirred. Ethan leaned forward, his heart pounding. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. The light made her squint, and slowly she turned her head. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, but warm like a bridge rebuilt in stillness. She blinked, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan, why are you here? He swallowed hard, gripping her hand. For you. For the boys. Her eyes filled with tears. You know? I know. And I came too late. She said nothing, just let the tears fall. He lowered his head, pressing a kiss to her fragile fingers. I'm sorry for everything. But I'm here now, Grace. I'll stay until you tell me to go. She let out a faint laugh through tears. I already told you to go, remember? I don't listen anymore. A tear slipped from her cheek onto his hand. He whispered, You're stronger than I ever knew. Thank you for keeping them alive. She took a deep, shaky breath. Promise me, if anything happens to me, you'll raise them. Don't, he said quickly. No more if. We'll raise them. Together. She looked at him, her gaze tired but full of faith. In her eyes, something had both broken and healed. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon. Light spilled through the window, touching their joined hands. A new morning, a new beginning. In the quiet, they both heard it. The faint monitor tones from the NICU next door. 2 steady, strong heartbeats. That's them, Grace whispered. I know, Ethan replied. And after all the nights of pain and silence, after every mistake and every storm, they finally listened to the voice in the night, not of the past, but life is calling them back again. That morning, sunlight slipped through the thin white curtains, painting soft gold stripes across the cream-colored wall. The whole hospital felt lighter somehow, footsteps, rolling carts, murmured conversations blending into a quiet, living symphony. Grace woke for the second time. This time there was no stabbing pain, no blinding panic, just exhaustion, stillness, and a hand. That same hand had held hers through the night, warm, steady, trembling slightly but never letting go. She turned her head. Ethan was still there. His eyes were sunken from sleeplessness, hair disheveled, shirt wrinkled, but his gaze wasn't cold for the first time in a long time. Good morning, he said softly, voice low and hoarse, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace around them. I'm still alive, she whispered, half joking, half in awe. He smiled, tired, but real. You are, and so are the babies. Tears welled in her eyes. The babies. Her voice broke. I was so scared to lose them. I know, Ethan said, tightening his hold on her hand. But you didn't lose anything. You kept everything alive with your own life. She turned her face away. You shouldn't be here, Ethan. If I weren't here, you wouldn't be anywhere for me to find. That stopped her. She glanced down at his arm, at the white bandage still wrapped around it. I gave you blood, AB negative. They said I was the only match. A shaky laugh escaped her through tears. You always find a way to save me before I can hate you for it. He said nothing, because between them, Words like sorry were too small now. The silence between heartbeats spoke louder. After a while, she whispered, "I want to see them. The doctor said this afternoon. Are they okay?" He nodded, eyes lighting up. "I saw them. Tiny, fragile, but beautiful. I don't know how you did it." "I didn't," she said faintly. "They chose to live. I was just lucky enough to live with them." He bit his lip, unable to answer. He stood, straightening her blanket, then walked to the window. Outside, Seattle's sky was a clear blue, washed clean by days of rain. The sun was rising over Lake Union in the distance, shimmering gold. He looked out, murmuring almost to himself, "It's been so long since I've seen light like this." She tilted her head. "Have you been living well, Ethan? Since you left?" "No, I've just been existing," he said quietly. "I thought I wanted freedom, but it turns out what I left behind was freedom itself." Grace watched him for a long moment. Something in her eyes shifted, not forgiveness yet, but a kind of quiet peace, replacing exhaustion. "Ethan." "Yeah? Don't make promises today. I'm too tired to believe them. But if you truly want to stay, then stay. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, just because you want to." He nodded. No grand vow, no drama, just a simple, honest nod, the truest one he'd ever made. That afternoon, the sunlight turned honey gold. Pilar entered with a young nurse, gently pushing 2 small incubators. Inside them 2 tiny angels, pink and sleeping, wrapped in soft blankets, knit hats covering their heads. On each wristband, Baby A, Ben Lewis. Baby B, Blake Lewis. Grace broke down the moment she saw them. She reached out, stopped halfway, afraid her touch might shatter the miracle before her. "You can touch them," Pilar said kindly. "They're waiting for you." Ethan stood behind her, silent, watching her reach out to the life she'd carried alone, the life he had once walked away from. Grace brushed a trembling fingertip against Ben's tiny palm. He gripped it, just a reflex, but enough to make her sob like she'd never cried before. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's Mommy." Ethan bowed his head. Tears fell onto his clasped hands. Pilar quietly stepped out, leaving them in a room filled with golden light. Grace turned to him. "I'd chosen their names long ago," she said softly. "I never thought I'd get to tell you." "I know," he murmured. "Pilar told me. Ben and Blake, beautiful names. I picked them because I wanted them always to belong together. 2 hearts, 1 rhythm." He looked at the twins and whispered, "Just like their parents." She turned away, but the corner of her mouth curved slightly, a fragile, fleeting smile, but real. Outside, the sun lowered, painting amber streaks across the window pane. The light touched her hair, turning it into a halo radiant and delicate. Ethan knew that no apology would erase the months she'd spent alone. But he also knew this was where he would begin again, by her bedside, in the first light of a late summer afternoon, where the deepest pain had somehow become the root of something new. Night fell slowly. Seattle cooled again, the lamplight splitting their shadows across the tiled floor. Grace slept peacefully after the nurses wheeled the babies back to the NICU. Ethan stayed beside her, staring at the empty chair across the room, the one he should have filled all those months ago. He remembered the courthouse, the smell of old wood, the sound of the pen, her voice saying, "I hope you find what you're looking for." He'd found it, and lost it. Only now did he understand love doesn't die in a single day. It dies in every silent moment when one person needs a word, and the other says nothing. A knock at the door. Pilar peeked in. "The boys are doing well," she said with a smile. The bigger one, Ben, opened his eyes when he heard his mother's voice. "Really?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really. Babies like that. They know." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "She's lucky, you know. And so are you. Not everyone gets a second chance." When she left, the room fell into stillness again, just breath, wind, and the quiet rhythm of 2 hearts that had once broken each other. Ethan bowed his head and whispered, "Thank you for not dying, for giving me another chance to live, this time for real." Days passed. Grace was moved to recovery. Her body was weak, but her spirit steadied. She ate small portions, spoke more, and smiled when shown photos of the twins. One noon, Ethan walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. "Here," he said. "Not to drink, just to smell. You remembered that?" She smiled faintly. "I remember everything, even though you used to scold me for making it too strong. You never got the ratio right. I've learned now." She looked at him. He was still Ethan, but his eyes had changed. There was fear there, gratitude, and a fragile hope. "I don't know what happens when I leave this place," she said quietly. "I do," he answered. "We can't just pretend for the kids. We can't go back." "I'm not asking to go back," he said gently. "I just want to start over. As friends, as co-parents, whatever you'll allow." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "If you really want to stay, don't talk. Show me. I will." And he did. Every morning, Ethan came to the hospital. He learned how to scrub his hands, open the NICU door, feed through a tube, and listen for the beeping rhythm of tiny hearts. At first, the nurses didn't let him hold them, but slowly, they saw his patience, his quiet persistence. On the 10th day, Pilar placed Ben into his arms. Ethan barely dared to breathe. The baby was so small, so warm, his little fist curling weakly against Ethan's chest. "You hear me, Ben?" he whispered. "It's Dad." The baby stirred and smiled. Not honestly, just a reflex, but it was enough to undo him. Grace watched from across the room, something inside her shifting. Not forgiveness yet, but a beginning. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, Ethan sat on the small balcony outside recovery. The wind was cool. The city glimmered faintly beyond the glass. He thought of Michael's voice on the phone. "Come back, Ethan. The project's waiting." But now, even the faintest cry from the NICU meant more than any applause or deal. He typed one short message to Michael. "I'm not coming back. I have 2 reasons to stay." Then he switched off his phone and looked up at the sky. Between drifting clouds, a thin crescent moon appeared. Ethan smiled softly. For the first time in years, he wasn't running anymore. Seattle's night fell cold and fast, like an exhale that turned to frost. There was no rain, yet the air still carried that damp scent the city never seemed to lose, the smell of things that never thoroughly dried. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit, the light was soft and sterile, a cool white glow spilling over rows of incubators. Everything was hushed except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Bape, bape, bape. That sound, half comfort, half terror, was the only proof that life held on. Grace sat by the glass wall, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her face was pale, but her eyes carried a fragile light that flickers inside a small lamp on a long, dark night. Inside the incubators, her 2 babies slept, tiny fists curled, their whole bodies smaller than a breath of warmth. Ethan walked in, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to her gently. "Don't drink it," he said. "Just hold it. For the heat." She nodded, wrapping her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Ben's sleeping better tonight," she murmured, eyes still fixed on the glass. "Yeah, and Blake too," he said softly. 2 little fighters. They stood there together in silence. It wasn't the tense silence they once knew. This one was quieter, humbler, a silence of acceptance, and 2 people learning to trust again. "Ethan," she said after a while, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah? I still don't know how to forgive you. But when I look at them," her eyes softened, "I think maybe God's giving us another chance. Not to go back, but to live better than before." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I just want to stay if you'll let me." "Then stay," she replied, still watching the incubators. "It's going to be a long night." It was. Around midnight, a small alarm went off, soft, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. Pilar rushed in with another nurse. "Blake's oxygen levels are dropping," she said quickly. "It's not serious yet, but we must monitor him closely." Ethan stepped back, heart pounding. Grace froze, her hands pressed to her chest. They watched as the team adjusted wires, tubes, sensors, every movement precise and urgent under the harsh light. The whole thing lasted only minutes, but to Grace, it felt like an eternity. She couldn't breathe until the sound returned. Beep, beep, steady again. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed back into the chair. Pilar placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He's fine now," she said softly. "Just a lung reflex. Happens with preemies. Perfectly normal." Grace nodded, tears already spilling down her face. Ethan sat beside her, his hand finding hers. She didn't pull away. She held it tight. "I used to be terrified of moments like this," he murmured. "Moments like what?" "The kind where you can't do anything but wait. I always needed control over work, our marriage, and the future. But I forgot. Some things can only be held together by faith." Grace gave a tired smile. "So you're learning to believe again?" "I'm learning everything again," he said softly. "How to love, how to be afraid." A breeze slipped through the cracked door, rustling the curtain. Somewhere down the hall, a gurney rolled past. The hospital seemed wrapped in a sacred kind of silence. Grace's voice trembled like prayer. "If Blake makes it through this night, we can start over." Ethan nodded, eyes glistening. "Then I'll pray with you." They sat there side by side, saying nothing more. The glow from the machines painted their faces in shifting hues, half fatigue, half faith. Sometimes, Ethan got up to pace the room to ensure the monitors still beeped. Each sound felt like his own heartbeat. Around 3 a.m., Blake stirred. Numbers climbed on the screen, pulse rising, oxygen steady. Pilar smiled, whispering, "Stronger than he looks." Grace broke down again, but her tears were light, almost joyful this time. Ethan bowed his head, his forehead brushing her shoulder. For the first time since their divorce, they held each other with no anger left between them. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," he murmured. "Thank you for letting me come back." They stayed that way as the long night faded. And when dawn finally touched the window, the sky outside was pale and thin as watercolor. Grace had fallen asleep on his shoulder. He didn't move, just sat there, watching her breathe. He whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him, "I used to think success was walking away. But now I know it's being able to stay, in the one place that needs you." Inside the incubator, Ben stirred. Blake's eyes fluttered open, just a sliver of life, but bright. Ethan stood, pressing his palm against the glass. "Good morning, son," he said softly. "You made it through your first night." Blake stretched a tiny hand, grasping at air as if reaching for the sound. Pilar entered, clipboard in hand. "Good news," she said with a grin. "Both boys are stable. We're moving to daytime care." Grace woke to the sound of her voice. "I heard that," she said hoarsely. "See, I told you just one more night." Ethan smiled. "You were right." "No," she whispered. "They were right. Maybe. All of us were." He sat beside her. They said nothing more, just watched their sons breathe, two small lives holding the weight of their redemption. Grace was allowed to hold them for the first time a few days later. Ethan stood by, hovering nervously, helping with the blanket as if it were made of glass. She lifted Ben first. He was impossibly small, but the world balanced in her arms. "I remember my first ultrasound," she said softly. "When the doctor said twins, I didn't believe it. I thought it was a mistake. But when I saw 2 heartbeats, I knew no matter what happened, I'd keep them both." "I wish I'd been there," Ethan said quietly. "No," she replied gently. "You couldn't have been. If you were, maybe I wouldn't have found the strength to make it through." He didn't answer. She hadn't said it to wound him, it was simply the truth. You must walk on some roads alone to learn the value of walking together. Ethan rested a hand on her back. "When you're discharged, where will we go?" "I haven't thought about it. I have a small house in Queen Anne, near the park. Bought it after the divorce. I guess it reminded me of you. Why keep it? Maybe I was waiting for forgiveness, even if I didn't believe it would ever come." She looked at him, her gaze calmer than before. "If you want to make things right, start small: diapers, bottles, sleepless nights. Can you handle that?" He chuckled, voice rough. "I used to sign $1 million contracts. If it means learning to mix formulas, I'll study it like a new language." She laughed, quiet, but genuine. 7 nights later, all 4 of them shared the same room. Grace is in bed, Ethan is in the chair, and the twins are in their cribs. Outside, Seattle rain returned, soft, steady, familiar. Sometime after midnight, Ben began to cry. The first real cry since leaving the NICU. Ethan jumped up, fumbling with bottles and blankets, spilling milk down his shirt. Grace opened her eyes, watching him clumsy, frantic but gentle. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he muttered. "You're doing it right," she whispered. She sat up, guiding his hands, and they changed the diaper together. The room filled with the scent of milk and sleep and life. When Ben finally quieted, Ethan held him close, patting his back. "You know," he said softly, "I think I just found the most beautiful sound in the world." "What's that?" "The sound of our child breathing." She looked at him, her gaze softening. "Maybe. I'm starting to believe you've really changed." He set the baby down gently, turned to her. "I'm not changing for forgiveness, Grace. I'm changing because I can't stand another day of being who I was." She didn't answer, just watched him. Then, almost to herself, she said, "We'll have many nights like this." "I know. Are you afraid?" "No. Only one thing. That one night, you won't be here." She turned away, but a faint smile curved her lips. Outside, the rain kept falling soft, even, like the city's heartbeat. The next morning, Pilar entered with a smile. "The boys are fully stable. If they keep this up, they'll be discharged next week." Grace looked at Ethan. Their eyes met no words, only a quiet promise. It is not a vow to love again, but to stay, try, and not to go. He walked to the window. The sky was a pure, endless blue. Grace joined him and whispered, "I prayed last night." "For what?" "For us to never repeat the things that once destroyed us." Ethan took her hand. "I prayed for the same, and I'll watch every night if I have to keep that alive." Sunlight poured through the glass, spilling over their joined hands. A long night was over. A small promise was born, and love after so long began to breathe again. The morning they left the hospital, Seattle greeted them with rain again. Not the kind that drenched, it was misty, fine and lingering, like the city's quiet way of saying welcome back to those who had just walked out of a storm. Grace sat in a wheelchair, Ben in her arms, while Ethan pushed from behind, a small bag of baby things slung over his shoulder. Pilar walked beside them, holding an umbrella over all three. "Be careful," Pilar said gently. "Don't let the babies catch a chill, and come back for your checkup on time, okay?" Grace looked up and smiled. "I owe you a lifetime of thank yous." "Just live well," Pilar replied, her eyes glistening. "People like you deserve another chance at life." At the hospital's front doors, Ethan leaned down and whispered, "Ready?" "For what?" "For the world outside." She looked up. The sky was a grey blur, raindrops bursting softly on the glass canopy above. "Maybe not," she said, "but I want to try." He smiled. The umbrella covered them both, her, him, and the tiny child in her arms. And so, beneath Seattle's patient drizzle, they stepped forward together, no promises spoken, only the quiet rhythm of two people beginning again. The house in Queen Anne sat on a quiet slope, with a porch that looked down toward the lake. Ethan had bought it over a year ago, but had never really lived there. When he unlocked the door, dust hung in the air, the smell of old wood blending with time. "You never used this place?" Grace asked. "No," he said softly. "I came once a month, to make sure it was still standing, like some part of me still was." She looked around, a small living room, white curtains, and in the corner a piano. "Her piano." "This," she breathed. "It's yours," he said quietly. "I found it. The new tenant wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't." Grace ran her fingers over the keys. One note rang out fragile, but whole. She smiled. "I thought it had died." "No," he murmured, "just sleeping." He set Blake gently in the crib and adjusted the blanket. Every movement was careful, slow, uncertain but full of meaning. Grace watched him, realizing something strange. The man before her, the one who had once broken her heart, was now the same man piecing it back together, not with words, but with small, deliberate acts. "I think," she said quietly, "we can try again. Not to love, not yet. To live together right this time." He turned, surprise softening into something like gratitude. "Try again is more than enough," he said. "I don't need anything else." That night, they sat on the porch, 2 cups of tea steaming between them. Rain tapped gently on the roof, while inside, the twins slept to a lullaby humming from a phone. The world felt smaller, but kinder. Tea, rain, breath, and warmth, all under one roof. "Do you remember," Grace said softly, "the last time we sat like this? It was raining then, too. I asked you, would you be afraid if love were a wound? I remember. And you said, no, I'm only afraid of not feeling anything anymore." She smiled faintly. "And now?" "Now," he said, "I think pain isn't the worst thing. It means you can still feel. It means you still care." She nodded. The rain fell steadily, soft as heartbeats. Neither of them called the other husband or wife, but the distance between them had changed shape. It wasn't absence anymore, but quiet understanding. Across the room, one of the twins stirred. Grace turned and whispered, "Do you ever think, if Pilar hadn't called, everything would have been different?" "I think about that all the time," Ethan said. "If she hadn't, I'd have lived the rest of my life as a ghost." "Then it's good she called." They both laughed softly, the way rain laughs when it meets the sea. Days slipped by gently, as if time was learning to breathe again. Each morning, Ethan woke early to warm bottles, fumbling with diapers, spilling milk, trying again and again. Grace watched him half amused, half tender. Her strength returned. She began walking around the house, practicing on the piano. Each note trembled but carried light. Whenever she played, the babies went quiet as if they, too, remembered something from before they were born. One afternoon, when sunlight spilled through the windows, Ethan carried Blake out to the porch. The baby's eyes opened wide, reflecting the grey blue of the sky. "See that?" Ethan whispered. "That's Seattle, the city of rain, but also where the sun always finds its way back." Grace watched him from the doorway, her heart filling with a quiet gratitude. Not perfect happiness, but peace, the kind that comes after surviving. She knew they might never be who they once were, but they were no longer what they used to be. After the twins were asleep that evening, the house smelled of soup and candlelight. Ethan placed an envelope on the table. "What's that?" she asked. "My last contract," he said. "I resigned. Sold my shares to Michael." "You're sure? That company was everything you once wanted." "I don't want to trade everything anymore. I'd rather keep this." He nodded toward her and the two sleeping miracles down the hall. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "So what now?" "I'll start small," he said. "A little studio, maybe. Work when the babies nap. The rest of the time, I want to be here." She looked at him, her voice a whisper. "I don't know what our future will look like, Ethan, but I know I don't want to live afraid anymore." "Neither do I," he said. "And if love once broke us, then maybe this time it can be what heals." He reached out and touched her hand. Not a proposal, not a grand beginning, just a touch enough to say we're still here, still breathing, still bound by the same blood that now ran through two small hearts sleeping nearby. On these pushed the Stoffel Weekruf the park near the house on the first sunny day in weeks. Green grass, golden light, the faint salt of the sound in the air. Ethan walked beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the twins' tiny movements. Strangers smiled as they passed. Someone stopped to coo at the babies, twins. "They're beautiful." Grace turned to Ethan, smiling. "I think this might be happiness," she said. "Quiet, imperfect, but real." "I've thought so since you opened your eyes in that hospital," he said. She looked at him, laughing softly. "Ethan." "Yeah? If I ever falter again, will you still be here?" "Not just here," he said, kissing her forehead. "Everywhere you need me." Evening came. The last sunlight stretched across the lake, twin streaks of gold on the water. Grace looked down at the babies, and Ethan's hand found hers. "You know," he said quietly, "my blood runs in your veins now and theirs. We're tied together forever, not by promises, but by something truer." She smiled. "The blood we share." He nodded. "And love, no matter how it changes, remains love." When the city lights shimmered and rain returned that night, they sat by the window watching it fall. It wasn't sorrow anymore. It was rain that cleansed, that reminded them they were alive. The twins slept peacefully, stirring now and then. Grace rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. He didn't speak, just held her hand tighter. Their heartbeats fell into rhythm, slow, steady, warm. Outside, Seattle glowed in soft gold. Inside, 4 small lives sat within that glow, a family, imperfect but real. And sometimes, that alone is the closest thing to a miracle.